You know, I love a good article, and I love reading articles about things I obsess over. And as a writer, I often like to analyze articles and to kind of break them down to assess their effectiveness, etc. It's what I do for a living as one who teaches writing in higher education. And somebody recently presented the idea of like, Donny, you should look up Godzilla articles that circulate on the wide web and break them down and analyze them. And I was like, that's a brilliant idea. So I decided to start doing that. And I went out and I found an article titled 10 Harsh Realities of Rewatching the First Godzilla Movie 51 Years Later. Now, emotionally, like if I were to kind of get my emotional reaction out of the way first, which is what I tell students to do, it seems like a shocking article. Like it is very much a shocking title, like with the word harsh reality. But analytically speaking, use the number 10 obviously means that it's going to be a list of some sort. So let's take a look at it together and see what it's all about, shall we? So if we look at this article at the top, it's from comicbookresources.com. So just to kind of like help everyone understand, comicbookresources.com is a site that does some pretty comprehensive journalistic coverage, very much personalized journalistic coverage of a lot of different franchises. There are some articles that I've read from Comic Book Resources that I find really good and really interesting, and this one could very well be pretty interesting. I always find think pieces on the first Godzilla film particularly interesting. Usually they are rather comprehensive, so I'm very curious to see the level of comprehensiveness in this one. So obviously it looks like it begins with an introduction, just like a general introduction, providing some layout here. So Godzilla was released back in 1954. So like some historical context. Consequently, attitudes towards its status as an all-time great might be cemented or changed accordingly. It also says that in some ways the film may have aged poorly. In others, there's a sense that something has been lost as newer variations of the franchise see it to depart further from its roots. So to me, that kind of suggests that it's probably hearkening to the MonsterVerse. I would say that the MonsterVerse has never really tried to connect to Godzilla's roots. It's always carved itself as something different. And I think appropriately so, because I personally feel that it would be rather inappropriate for the United States itself to produce a Godzilla film that is supposed to be reflective of the original. Considering there is so much regarding like post-war trauma, like in Japan's historical context, that would be overlooked, or it would many might interpret it as us trying to, take advantage of that trauma through creating a carbon copy of the original from a Western context. But I don't know, like it says that it's aged poorly. I personally do not think that the first Godzilla film has aged poorly, but I am curious to see what this person has to say. So the first thing on this person's list is that Godzilla is in black and white. And obviously this provides some historical context. And it kind of, like, this seems very affirming. The second item is stop motion is in full effect. Stop motion. Godzilla is a particularly brilliant display of what stop motion can achieve in a world of cinema, because it might have seemed impossible to bring such a destructive beast to life without the advent of CGI. Ooh. Okay. So here is the first pretty significant inaccuracy here. To my understanding, Godzilla has never used stop motion. I know there's been some deleted scenes in various films where there's been some experimentation with stop motion, Godzilla vs. Biollante being one of them, but obviously this uses suitmation. Like Godzilla has always classically used suitmation. So to me, this section of the article seems like a misinformed take. Maybe they did not do enough research to know that it was called suitmation and they mixed that up or conflated it with stop motion. Obviously, kind of a cause for concern. Number 3, Godzilla isn't perfect. Okay. Going on more about the differences between stop motion and CGI. Again, more misinformation here. Godzilla itself looks fake in a couple of key scenes, and this movement looks stilted. Uh, See, what I find confusing here is they aren't providing, like, any particular scene examples or scene references. Like, I feel like more concrete scene references would make it a little easier to at least try to understand where the argument is going here. But again, because it seems to be focusing on that misinformed stop motion tidbit, I'm getting more and more worried as I read this, unfortunately. The sets on Godzilla were limited. Well, I mean, of course they were limited. It was 1954. I mean, granted, I feel like for 1954, a lot of sets in Godzilla films are very impressive, are absolutely impressive. I'm like, for example, I'm thinking of the Mount Fuji set in Destroy All Monsters. Like that was brilliantly put together, and it was huge, if memory serves me correctly. So I would say that they utilized their resources well. They probably had to definitely innovate significantly, but they utilized the resources well, and I feel like the sets were pretty impressive. And I'm not just saying that as a Godzilla fan. Like, comparatively, if you look at other films from the 50s and 60s, like the sets in Godzilla films are pretty top notch. There are some cracks in the illusion, I suppose. There are some instances where it can be rough around the edges. But again, though, if we had a few more examples, like that would make it a little bit more concrete for the reader here in this article. The dialogue is stilted. Human characters in Godzilla bring depth to the film and ground it in a sense of reality. Interesting. Despite the importance that has been placed on human characters, a trope that the rest of Godzilla franchise would copy, the initial script wasn't always as competent as one would like. At times, the delivery feels forced and the material doesn't land with what's happening. Again, I don't really know where that's going. There's no examples. There's no concrete examples. Obviously, the script feels stilted because many of these characters are tragic figures and they are larger than life. And watching both versions of that film, one can assess and determine that the delivery doesn't really feel forced. The delivery is being done in the context of a hugely traumatic event that happens. Like, whenever there's like traumatic events, like one would expect there to be, a certain grandiosity to the script, right? To the dialogue. The next one, there's only one monster. This doesn't really, okay, so it's suggesting that it is a harsh reality that there is only one monster. Again, I don't really understand. Like, I feel like that's probably a strength of the first Godzilla film here. The pacing of Godzilla is off. So now we're kind of getting into the run times. And it looks like it suggests that the script being dull kind of makes the audiences feel like they have to wait forever. I don't know. I disagree with that. Like, I feel like if we had too much Godzilla in that original film, we would be kind of robbed of the utter shock and horror that we experience when we see Godzilla. I feel like that film effectively uses Godzilla in an impactful way in that 8 minutes of screen time. Just saying. A few Godzilla sequels have lived up to the original. I mean, that's true. I don't disagree with that. Okay, so the conclusion on this section, alas, that kind of repetition, it would be difficult for any other interpretation to live up to the hype. Okay. That's why Godzilla Minus One was beloved, because it felt as though someone finally understood the character. Okay, I do agree with that. I do agree with that. So it looks like it's kind of bridging the original to Godzilla Minus One a little bit. Godzilla tackles dark themes. I mean, this is true. I feel like the historical description here is a little bit vague, but I feel like it does kind of, in essence, capture. Godzilla led to a franchise. I don't see it. Again, I'm confused by the title. This isn't a harsh reality that Godzilla led to a franchise. Interesting. Now, I'm not even gonna look at the comments at the end because I'm sure the comments are probably pretty glaring. But I don't know. I really think that articles like this, like you could like there's going to be some good in them and then there's going to be some misinformation in them. And I feel like this article is an example of that. Like it makes some relatively salient points, but again with that stop motion confusion and other aspects that aren't super accurate or don't even have examples necessarily to back up claims. Like I think it leaves too much to the imagination for the reader. But I'm going to place this in a little bit of context. I do know that a lot of people tend to be very hypercritical of these types of articles. I myself have been hypercritical of them either. We have to think about the relationship between speaker and audience here. So our like websites like Comic Book Resources or BuzzFeed or other sites like that who do like a lot of list form articles, those articles are typically expected to be consumed very quickly by the audience. So there needs to be very quick chunks of information presented. And usually the information isn't always sourced. It tends to be in like just one paragraph form, sometimes a bullet point list. And unfortunately, because they are written with this expectation of like needing to churn out content quickly, I feel like that's how a lot of sourcing slips through the cracks. And I feel like that's how a lot of misinformation tends to slip through. So if you are a Godzilla fan, when you are going out and reading various articles, just keep in mind that like make sure you look at the about section of the website, understand where it's coming from, and think about like who the intended audience is. Like I feel like that the intended audience of an article like this would be like just like the everyday viewer who may not be super familiar with Godzilla, but it might give them some passing knowledge of Godzilla. But unfortunately, that's where some of the concern also rests, because in that passing knowledge they get of Godzilla, are they getting the accurate information? So now I think that this writer is a very good writer. I think that they like have an excellent flow and pace to their writing. So I don't want to like say anything negative about the writer necessarily, but I do think in situations like this, a bit more research is warranted if possible. And yeah, I don't know. Share your thoughts in the description section or in the comment section of the video. I will have a link to the article if you want to read it in its entirety in the description section. And let me know if you would like me to continue this series because I think it would be a fun little Godzilla thing to do, I guess. Anyway, click like, subscribe, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.